All right, at least on my end, the time is 9, and I can welcome you to this webinar that we will host together with Bellona Europa and CCUS Norway. Some practicalities: it will be recorded so you can share it with your colleagues, and it will run until 10. The next hour you will hear from me, and I'll present myself shortly later, but you'll also meet Hanna Biro and Lina Strandvåg Nagell that are in your screen. Yeah, Hanna, feel free to introduce yourself, and Lina as well.
Oh yes, hi everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Hanna Biro. I'm a policy advisor at Bellona Europa. I have a focus on CCS, sustainable economics, and with a more particular focus on just transition and public perception of CCS.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. You'll hear more from me in the panel discussion. I'll let Hanna take it in the start here. So my name is Lina Strandvåg Nagell, and I'm a senior manager at Bellona Europa, focusing on our work on CCS and on sustainable finance and economics.
We also have Markus Sebastian Hole with us from Hafslund, Oslo, Celsio. Do you want to also say hello?
Yeah, so my name is Markus Hole. As you said, I'm the head of public affairs in Hafslund, Oslo, Celsio, the waste to energy and district heating operator in Norway. And since 2015, we have been working on building a carbon capture plant, all the waste to energy plant that you see behind me.
Great. And last on the Marit Post-Melbye from Zero.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Marit Post-Melbye, as you said, Brita, and I am leading our work within industry in Zero. So we work with CCUS, carbon removals, hydrogen and bioeconomy, and also building new green industries.
And last, my name is Brita Staal, and I am representing CCUS Norway. We're a membership-based organization, and I will try to guide you through the next hour so that we can learn more about this strategy that was released the 6th of February, and also understand what this means for Norway. Very shortly about my organization. CCUS Norway is a membership-based organization. As I said, we're working together to environmentally and resource efficiently capture, use, and store CO2. We have members, 60 members representing industrial companies with CO2 emissions, technology suppliers with developed CCS technology, advisors and consultants with expertise within CCS and CCU, as well as research companies like Nordsus, Sintef and IFE. Our main goal is, of course, to continue building competence and expertise in this area in Norway, and to broaden the industry and support the full value chain. So we function as a center of expertise for CCUS and a network for sharing and spreading cooperation. So we do also have common projects across our members. We, of course, always also want new members. We can only grow a stronger industry by supporting and cooperating across the value chain. So we invite more members to join us. Membership is open for everyone and is particularly aimed at, of course, industrial companies, technology suppliers, advisors and consultants, or other knowledge bearers in this space, and of course research companies and academia. You can find out more about us primarily on our website, where we have all the info about our projects, among others, also a recent literature study on CCUS, and soon an interactive map of all the CCUS projects in Norway. And please contact us with any questions or follow us on LinkedIn. With that, I am very interested to hear from Hanna. It's a long-awaited strategy that marks a crucial step to enable CCUS to play its necessary role on our path to net zero. And I think we are all very excited to hear the analysis from Bellona on how this can really kickstart a European market and possibly help us deliver on our ambition to reach net zero by 2050. So I'll stop sharing and allow you to go on with that, Hanna, and hopefully soon people can also see your screen.
Right. Are you able to see my hang on. Now?
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So in this presentation, I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what the industrial carbon management strategy is. What does it promise? What does it promise to bring? And whether that's going to be enough, and sort of how to move forward from this. Where do we need to increase our ambitions? So just to begin, why do we need an industrial carbon management strategy? We need it because we have a legally binding 55% reduction target by 2030, a legally binding net zero target by 2050. There's a newly introduced 90% reduction target by 2040 by the Commission. And these targets simply cannot be achieved without CCS technologies, because they are a key decarbonization technology solution for hard-to-abate industries. Industrial decarbonization will require large-scale infrastructure deployment, coordination among member states and stakeholders, as well as public funding, at least in the development phase, until the market becomes self-sufficient. So this is why we need a strategy, and this strategy is set up is to set up a carbon management framework that will help then decarbonize production processes in the industrial sector, and also complement other decarbonization solutions where those are necessary. So to achieve this, the European Commission outlines 3 pathways: CCS, CCU, and CDR, and makes projections on where capture, storage, utilization needs to be in order to achieve the EU's climate targets. It's important to emphasize these are not targets, these are just projections, which can still change based on how the market and the technologies develop over the next decades. So what is first off important to mention, that while CCS and CCU are correctly labeled as a technological pathway, CDR is not a pathway. It is a potential outcome resulting in negative emissions. CDR is a possible outcome where CO2 is captured from the atmosphere, either directly or indirectly, and is permanently stored. What it has in common with the 2 pathways is that it largely relies on the same infrastructure as CCS, but in every case, having to result in negative emissions. Otherwise, it cannot be considered a removal, and that's why it's an outcome and not a pathway. And the third thing to mention here is the importance to clarify the distinct climate benefit of each pathway from individual source to sink, based on robust accounting and monitoring measures. This way, we'll know which source to sink path brings a climate benefit and can be considered a climate mitigation technology measure, or whether it's just a commercial activity. So the European Commission foresees the scale up of CCU and CCS technologies within the next 2 decades, and we see until 2023 until 2030, the focus will be on CO2 capture from process emissions. That will still have to be defined with a focus on permanent storage with a projection, sorry, not a target, like it says on the slide, but a projection of 50 megatons per annum storage. And then later, for the next decade, by 2040, there will be an increased focus on direct air capture, the capture of biological emissions, and CO2 capture from fossil sources, with the projection up by 200 megatons per annum, which is then again increased by 2050 to 450 megatons per annum. And then what is clear from reading the strategy is that we have very decidedly moved away from discussing CCS in terms of if, to now recognizing it as a legitimate decarbonization tool for the EU, particularly in the context of industrial decarbonization. And now what needs to happen is to ensure that we limit our reliance on it as much as possible, prioritizing more cost-efficient and immediate measures where possible, so that CCS is only developed where there are basically no better alternatives to decarbonization. It's not the silver bullet solution, but it's necessary in some cases. So the strategy aims to bring together different policy strands to create an enabling regulatory environment to develop and scale up the deployment of these technologies that can facilitate these outlined CO2 reduction and removal projections on the screen. And it identifies 5 challenges for the market to take off. And these are the lack of a viable business case. The difficulty here is that deployment of capture, transport, and storage technologies require significant upfront investment, while there is still uncertainty about where the price of CO2 will be in the future, which brings large risks and can stand in the way of making investment decisions. And there is also a need to match supply and demand for low carbon products. There is also an incomprehensive regulatory framework. We have a directive on CO2 storage, but the entire value chain is not yet regulated, which creates uncertainties. There are CO2 specific cross value chain risks that we need to address, such as the simple fact that there is just no infrastructure for CO2 transport and storage at the moment. And this creates uncertainties for emitters who are considering investing in capture technologies. There is a need for better coordination among member states, which is sort of starting to develop now with the Aalborg Declaration. But there's still a long way to go, since the EU is not made up of just 5 or 6 countries. And finally, there is a lack of incentives for investments, which are absolutely key to driving innovation and creating economies of scale, which then in return can create a self-sufficient functioning market. In the strategy, the Commission then outlines a few action points to address these 5 challenges. First off, the Commission plans to boost the business case for the deployment of these technologies through developing a platform for demand assessment and aggregation of CO2 transport and storage services. This platform can help match storage and transport providers with emitters, and this would also have the potential to provide contract and procurement transparency. It also aims to address this challenge through developing sectoral roadmaps for industrial decarbonization and developing a step-by-step guide for permitting processes for net zero strategic projects for CO2 storage. This transparency and consistency that this guide can provide can really help facilitate making final investment decisions. I'm not going to go to mention every single point, action point. I'm just going to give some highlights on the most important ones. So the European Commission aims to set up a comprehensive regulatory framework, which is great news, starting with a CO2 transport regulation package, which is going to start to prepare already this year. This is going to be a really important legislation that will address cross-border integration, amongst others, technical specifications, and a host of challenges that are currently persisting and creating uncertainties to potential transport infrastructure providers. They also aim to establish a minimum standard for CO2 streams that can enter this future CO2 network. And this would also ensure liability for leakage. Very closely related to this aim is to propose an EU-wide CO2 transport infrastructure planning mechanism. This involves planning out the CO2 infrastructure network, which is a work that has actually already been started by the JRC, and a paper is now available online. And this initiative would also help assess the possibilities of repurposing existing infrastructure for CO2. The Commission also aims to address the currently lacking incentives for investments by putting together an investment atlas for storage, for potential storage sites, and will start engaging with the European Investment Bank on financing CCS and CCU projects. They also aim to boost financing for research and innovation in renewable technologies, and will look into ways in which local communities can be rewarded for hosting projects like this, infrastructure projects, capture projects, as at the moment public opposition is considered a possible risk, which in return then discourages investments going into the deployment of these technologies. And finally, also to boost the cooperation among member states, the Commission, in cooperation with these member states, aims to raise awareness on these technologies. And this is very important because it can provide some basic awareness, some basic knowledge on which about the technology in general, on which then these project developers can build upon when engaging with local communities. This is especially important for the Central and Eastern European region because the EU is often seen as more of a trusted institution than national governments, for example. So the Commission also aims to support a new industrial carbon management knowledge sharing network, kind of a long title. And then this refers to capture technologies as well as transport and storage site characteristics, regulatory aspects, standards, access to funding, stakeholder management, lessons learned from community engagement activities, sharing best practices, and this platform should be available for all relevant projects. However, the language on this is sort of vague, and the Commission does not technically claim it will establish this network, this platform. So out of these 22 activities that were listed on the previous slides. 7 activities come with some indication on the timeline. And based on these, we can expect the Commission to begin this year by addressing 3 challenges through starting the work on the proposal for the CO2 transport legislation, and starting the work on the CO2 transport infrastructure planning mechanism, and engaging with the EIB on financing CCS and CCU projects. In the next 2 years, then more emphasis will be placed on boosting investment and incentives for investments and building a business case. So overall, the strategy is a truly important milestone and a really great first step to achieve a full decarbonization of industries, with many really important action points that I outlined in the previous slides. What needs to be prioritized now is providing some clarity on the climate benefit for each pathway from source to sink, so we can distinguish between climate change mitigation measures and commercial activities. We also need more clarity on the energy requirements of powering these solutions, and when and whether they are actually in line with the EU's overall strategy on decarbonizing the energy system. And we also need more clear timelines on these action points, as for now only 7 of them indicate any type of timeline. And finally, we need more clarity on carbon dioxide removals and the proportion of technology-based solutions to nature-based solutions, which are not permanent. So this was a short overview. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hanna. I'll wait until I have everyone up on our screen and invite our panel in. And before I open up for all of them to comment on your presentation, I will also note that those listening in, some have already started. Please continue to feel free to post questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get through as many as possible in our time available. And while we wait for that chat to fill up, maybe we can just open up the floor for everyone to kind of come with the top of their mind comment on this. And maybe first to you, Lina, as Hanna's colleague. Bellona Europa has called the last decade a lost decade for decarbonizing our industries. And we are, of course, hoping that this strategy is a sign of hope, but I really want to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Hanna, for the great presentation. I think when you get these kind of documents, it can be very overwhelming to try to get into what they're actually saying. So I think a presentation was very much needed. I think that what we are seeing, of course, is that this is, yes, we do like to highlight, of course, that this should have happened a very long time ago. Indeed, we have lost quite a bit of time, but there's no need of kind of standing in a stampede in the past. We need to look forward. And I think that what is so important about this strategy is that it's actually setting a very clear plan and path ahead for actually ensuring that we can get a European market for CO2. And let's remember, this is, you know, the cornerstone of the EU is to ensure well-functioning internal markets, now also for CO2. So it's really at the core business of the EU and with its climate ambitions. So of course, I know we'll deep dive a bit more into the details here, but I think this is what we at least have called it in our reaction, is a watershed moment for CO2 or carbon management, as the new term is in the EU. So we think it's crucial, but of course, as always, there are things we would like to improve and things we would like to see maybe clarified, and that's something we can deep dive a bit more into.
And we'll get down to the more Norwegian insights at the end of our talk. I see we have a lot of questions that are still on a bit high level, but maybe we can let you loose on Zero's perspective. What do you see coming out of this strategy?
Well, thank you, and thank you, Hanna, for such a good presentation and overview of the strategy. To start on a positive note, there's a lot of positive things in this strategy, and I thought to highlight two of them. I really appreciate the role and clarity that is given to the carbon management solutions in total in reaching both 2030, 2040, and 2050 targets, and the clarity that we need both CCS, CCU, and carbon removals, both for fast reductions with the CCS and the role that CCU can play in substituting fossil carbon in the hard to electrify sectors. And lastly, also the role of carbon removals, both for faster net reduction and ultimately net zero and net negative ambitions. And the second point I wanted to highlight from a Norwegian perspective is that the ambitions and the scope that is given both throughout the value chain and also geographically, having the EU and all of its member states being so positive on CCS is very important from a Norwegian perspective. And this has been one of the main arguments in CCS politics in Norway for a lot of years, and the opportunity to have CO2 from whole of Europe being stored in Norway was one of the key arguments for the government's final investment decisions in Longship a few years back as well. So this is very important for the business opportunities and the business cases in Norway for CO2 storage especially. And now it's up to the member states as well to follow up with concrete policies, but we'll get back to that.
And last, Markus, maybe from well, you look like you're sitting in your factory right now. So from the industry perspective.
Yeah, from our side, I think I just need to echo what has already been said, that while the strategy doesn't have any concrete legislative proposal or anything, it's a watershed moment. And like a couple of years ago, when we were talking about CCS, both in general and on waste to energy, it was not the climate solution. It was electrifying and all other things, but not CCS. And now hats off to Chris Bolesta and his team for like taking CCS up on the top of the climate agenda in the EU. This has really happened a lot in a very few years, and it's this link between the 2050 targets and CCS is extremely good, because we're making the investment decisions that will last for 20 years, 25 years, and so on. So then we need this certainty that CCS will be in the center of the climate policies going forward. And for our company, as a waste to energy company in general, it was also a huge milestone. The sentiment towards waste to energy and CCS was really bad a couple of years ago, and it was like you could just recycle away out of waste to energy. But now we see that in the first paragraph of the fact sheet on the strategy, waste to energy is mentioned together with cement as a hard to abate industry. So that's really good for us, and so we are very, very positive towards this strategy. But it's just the starting point. Now we need to get all the legislative proposals in the next Commission mandate.
And I also see the waste to energy industries and that solution is so close to people too. So it's making it more relatable to everyday people to understand what this solution actually does. We have already got some questions in the chat. So before I take my questions, I wanted to take those directly towards Hanna's presentation. Yeah, great. I saw you disappear for a moment. There's one question from Walter Selén that asks you to explain why you view CDR as an outcome, not a distinct family of methods and technologies, including not only BECCS and DUCs, but also nature-based CDR, enhanced rock weathering, that will need to be included in any pathway to achieve net zero emissions.
Well, I cannot really comment on nature-based and the other type of reduction solutions because they're, well, first of all, they're not included in the strategy. And the reason why CDR is included in the strategy is because it relies on the same infrastructure for transporting CO2, for storing CO2 in the case of BACs, on capturing CO2. And this is why it's included in the strategy. But in essence, CCS and CCU are pathways. CCS can be CDR, it can be a removal, an outcome when it results in negative emissions. And when it doesn't, it's just CCS. So I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but we have a paper coming out exactly on this conflation of terms that should be out in a few days. So I would just like to direct everyone's attention to that.
Stay tuned on Bellona Europa's page to see that report. I guess it's a little bit on the same in terms of outcome and pathway, but do you want to reflect anything more on Steffi Ober's question of seeing CCUS as an outcome and not a pathway?
Sorry, me or the other?
Yeah, I think it was, or it open for everyone, but it seems to be directed to the presentation.
Okay, CCS and CCU absolutely are pathways to decarbonization. What needs to be ensured is that there is indeed a climate benefit when we look at the source and the sink and over the whole entire value chain and life cycle. In the case of CCU products, for example, to make sure that there is a climate benefit, there is more CO2 being reduced than otherwise would have, and this way we can make sure that we invest in solutions that are truly climate change mitigation solutions. Otherwise, we're only talking about commercial activities.
I guess on this, there's also a recent published literature study that is on our website, looking into the climate aspect and the overall view on CCUS use in terms of actually having a climate impact. And that's also reflected a lot in the wording of the strategy that CCUS is a solution where it makes sense, and that it has to be evaluated in terms of the different use. Two more questions before we round on to going more in depth on Norway. I see here that an anonymous attendee has asked if Bellona or any of the other panel speakers see flaws or shortcomings in the strategy that the European Commission should address moving forward. And I think there was a lot of shortcomings when it comes to a clear timeline and clear deliveries, and also, you know, yes, we need this regulatory package, but when will it come and how will it happen? But is there proposals in the strategy that are especially welcome in your perspectives and that should be prioritized?
Yeah, I can maybe start to say that one of the things that at least I have been waiting for is this proposed regulatory package on CO2 transport and market functioning. I like to just call it as a market regulation, basically, although that's not the name, but it is the description of what will be included. And I think that's really crucial because we need to have the same kind of rules across the European Union. And I think this will be crucial. It's something we've also seen has been discussed in the CCUS forum. And it's partly also things that have been discussed as part of the Net Zero Industry Act. So I also want to mention that one of the things of this strategy that is quite welcome is the fact that it's not developed in a vacuum, which very often can happen when you are developing these kind of large communications and strategies. So this is fitting very well with the previous work of the Commission as well, with the CCUS Forum and with the Net Zero Industry Act, which I think we will discuss a bit more when we talk about Norway as well. So we see that this is really a holistic approach to planning a well-functioning market for CO2. And then I think that, there was a leak circulated a few days before the actual version came out. And I think we saw in the final version that there were improvements on the language to really clarify. And this is a point that we try to make constantly. And Hanna also made it very well, to say that, we're not developing CCS for CCS's sake here. It's the climate impact and where it can have a climate impact. I think this is definitely something we'll talk about when we get to Norway as well, because as we hear, there's lots of business opportunities here for Norway, but we have to make sure that doesn't become the focus. This is about the climate. And I think that this is one of the things that was specified a bit more thoroughly in the strategy. And then, of course, the next step is, when will this happen? The devil is in the details. And unfortunately, a lot of the details here are missing. So we're very excited to see them coming.
Anyone else want to comment on that question?
I think from our side, we are very happy, as I said, with the mentioning of waste to energy, and also very happy with the strong focus on BECCS, that there's a big need for BECCS. But then I think the strategy or communication is missing the link between waste to energy and BECCS. Of course, they're talking about bioenergy with CCS. You could put half of the emissions coming from waste to energy within there, but there are some uncertainties within the industry if the Commission would recognize carbon removals coming from waste to energy as carbon removals because it's waste. Now we had some talks with DG Klima after the communication came out, and they were quite positive. So it's just that it's not written all out to explain that, but it's very positive, I think, in general. And also that, as Lina said, you're missing the concrete proposals. Now you have all the expectations what will come, but time is really of the essence. So if you want to reach the climate targets for 2030, people need to make the investment decisions 2024, 2025 for the capture projects. And then they need concrete proposals or legislative proposals, because what we see, there's a lot of uncertainties, and we experience this ourselves. And uncertainties can be tackled either with facts. The facts we don't have because we know there's a lot of good intentions, but we don't know the actual proposals. Then we could counter the uncertainty with logic, maybe. Look at everything that EU has presented. This will come. But for all the boards around Europe, it's hard to make investment decision based on logic that you don't have the numbers to put into your Excel sheet. So this is something that the Commission needs to take seriously, because even though everyone understands now that CCS will be crucial going forward, nobody dares to make the investment decision because there's nothing certain.
And just seeing the wording very many times, things will start in 2024. We will start to figure this out, and as you say, we also have to at the same time make these investment decisions to make it. There's one more question on the general strategy, and that's if there's any communication or current plans for wide-scale deployment of CCS, extending also to small-scale industrial clusters. I'll let this maybe be for you, Lina. Do you see anything of this or any plans for this in the strategic communication going out now?
So I'll let Hanna arrest me if I say something wrong. But of course, there are one of the things that are suggested is to establish these kind of platforms for coordination and looking into kind of aggregation of demand. And this, of course, will also extend to smaller emitters. But as I have seen in the strategy, there isn't a specific focus on this currently, but it's also not excluded. So I think that this might be one of the areas where clarity could be warranted. And I'll let Hanna raise her hand if maybe she has spotted something I haven't.
No, that's right. There's no special emphasis on smaller scale plants, but there is a mention of a need to put special emphasis on helping the plants that are well, not located close to industrial hubs or close to ports, larger ports, but how this support is going to materialize is not yet clear.
I think it's a very good question, because this is something that we're dealing with in Norway from the waste energy side, that we have all these small emission points around. Almost every city has its own waste to energy plant, but it's not big enough for Northern Lights or the others to actually bother to pick up. If it's like 100,000 there and 100,000 there, it's not enough. So we need to create regional hubs, and it's good that they're pointing out that as an issue.
Yeah, I fully agree on the last point from Markus. And in addition to waste to energy, there's a lot of industry sites in Norway working with CCS projects, but they are far from infrastructure and ports. And so this is should be on top of the agenda in Norway, because the Norwegian projects actually have to compete with much bigger and often cheaper carbon capture projects in the rest of Europe.
We'll dive now into Norway and see. Of course, we've been pioneering a lot of the larger scale projects, and had, of course, with our history, a special focus on storage. But we're also seeing a lot of our, market actors working with utilization. And I have one question in the chat here that especially asks about Norway's role in the CCUS market development in Europe, and I guess more in general, maybe to you, Anna. How do you see that we are able to participate in the European market, and how do kind of the Norwegian regulatory framework and Norwegian setup communicate with what is coming from Europe now?
Well, Norway has for sure been a front runner in CCS, and we're building the first full-scale value chain for capture and storage. So we have been a front runner, but we are seeing several other countries developing their CCS policies and businesses very fast in Denmark, Iceland, and other countries as well. So there's definitely a need in Norway for the concrete policies that have been said before to follow up the scale up and ramp up of both CCS and carbon removals, especially. And the role of Norway is, it's quite obvious that CO2 storage is maybe on top of that list, because we have a huge potential in Norway, and there's already awarded the CO2 licenses for well above 50 million tons of CO2 storage, and they're all supposed to be online before 2030. So the CO2 storage opportunity is, of course, important in Norway, both from a climate perspective, because it's needed to actually see the storage and climate benefit realized, but also from a business perspective.
I guess this question might have had a background of thinking that with our excess renewable energy, we could also be a factor into the CCUS market with the energy needs. But there, a lot of our trajectories on energy is also showing that we have a lot of industry that will also need that energy. So so that will be a battle also for the future. We have so many cool questions in the chat, so so I'll have to take just some of them. But I wanted to keep browsing on this, especially in terms of our EES, or since we, together with Switzerland and UK, is outside Europe for now, and that this strategy is very clear on reflecting on what they expect from the member states. Do we know what deliveries we will have through our economic agreement with the EU in this, and how do we see the inclusion or the need to also reflect in our national plans the things that the strategy is now asking from the member states?
I'd be happy to jump in on that. So I think that, of course, as part of the EEA, which is referenced quite frequently in the strategy, Norway and Iceland both have potential CO2 storage capacity there, and will be important actors. I actually think one of the maybe main challenges of Norway going forward is that we have some challenges when it comes to the clarity on whether or not EU legislation is valid in Norway and when. The timelines is not clear. This is actually something that we have seen very clearly in the discussion on the Net Zero Industry Act, and I'll touch a bit on that because I think it is so relevant to this strategy. Because one of the biggest discussions we had there, and for those of you who might not be aware, the Net Zero Industry Act, it sets out a 15 million ton injection capacity target to be developed by 2030. And it's an EU target. And that was a big discussion. Should it be an EEA target or an EU target? And one of the reasons why it was decided to keep it an EU target is because there is no automatic implementation of EU law into Norway. Now, if you have all the time in the world, that is not necessarily a problem. You can take the time to do the legal analysis. With the target to be developed by 2030, that is not a timeline that Norway currently is delivering on in the necessary speed, and that increases the investment risk. The same, I think, will be the case here for this regulatory package for a market that is well functioning. And if Norway is not implementing this legislation quickly and starts maybe discussing this when it comes to Norway for implementation and not when it's being developed in the EU, then I think Norway is at risk of making themselves rather irrelevant, because there will be completely different market conditions in the EU contra Norway. And I think that this is a big challenge, because there will be a perceived higher investment risk in Norway than it will be in the rest of Europe. So this is something I think will be a really big challenge and barrier. And I think also if we look to the Net Zero Industry Act, of course, one of the resulting consequences happening of the fact that this is an EU target, not an EEA target, is that oil and gas producers in the EU that actually have an obligation to develop 50 million tons of injection storage capacity by 2030 cannot go to Norway to develop this storage. It has to be developed in the EU. If Norway implements the Net Zero Industry Act, there will be an additional target for Norwegian storage. And then, of course, these actors can go back and forth. But legally and practically, this target could never have been an EEA target, because you could end up in a situation where there would maybe not even be an incentive to implement the Net Zero Industry Act from a Norwegian perspective, because it would be economically a better situation to have EU producers coming to Norway to develop storage without any obligation on Norwegian oil and gas producers. And that's not a level playing field. That's not fair competition in the market. And I think here it's very important to, encourage Norwegian governments to really take seriously that, as Anna is also mentioning, being a front runner in the past does not ensure competitiveness in the future. And I think maybe we need a little bit of a reality check there. But I think there's still time to change this if we act quickly.
And how do you encourage, and maybe also for you, Anna, how do you encourage Norwegian, both industries, but also politicians to engage and be part and make sure that we're on the boat when it now leaves the dock?
Yeah, I fully agree with Lina and the need for Norway to be on board on the Net Zero Industry Act, both on the ambition and also the legislations. And we have suggested that Norway set a national target for CO2 storage of 50 million tons of CO2. Sounds like a high number compared to the rest of the EU, but it's less than the awarded CO2 storage licenses already. And this is important because we need this domestic target to have the Net Zero Industry Act implemented, and actually seeing that the Norwegian government is stating that the regulations that are set in the Net Zero Industry Act on oil and gas producers is hard from they're saying it's challenging the principle in national and international law. And this is not only very harmful for the storage actors in Norway, but it's also lacking predictability for the Norwegian mainland industries that need access to CO2 storage. So this, from an EU Norway perspective, this should be on top of the list for the Norwegian government. And it's very disappointing that the Norwegian government always use a lot of time implementing EU regulations. We are so many years back. The revised Renewable Energy Directive from 2018 is still not implemented. And this is starting to be a huge problem in Norwegian climate politics.
And of course hurting our industries as well, because we're not able to get in at the moment where we should and can. We are expecting, of course, that the strategy will be followed up by the European Commission, and that there will be more key milestones and indicators to monitor progress and impact. For now, it seems like the main space to follow this up has been the CCUS forum. Do you expect, Lina, that there will be more follow-up sessions or timely kind of progress measures that could also include Norway, or have a channel in from and to Norway on this?
Yes, and I think that that's one thing that the strategy also focuses on, and we've also seen the Net Zero Industry Act as well, opening up for cooperation with the UK, with Norway as well, to make sure that there is the opportunity of having a European market, because I think everybody realizes that this is not a market that can be developed by one actor or one country. We need each other. We need to focus on this from a European perspective. And I think that the CCUS forum is really, you know, a stepping stone of that, and several other of these coordination platforms that is being established. So I think that the EU has created a system that could work really well for European coordination, not just EU coordination. And if I can be a little bit provocative, I feel like the ball is kind of in Norway's court right now to join, because these platforms are there. But of course, if Norway expects to kind of be pulled in, I'm not so sure if that's the first. Well, we don't have time for it. Let's say it like that.
Yeah, I can say that I completely agree with Lina, and the CCS forum has been very open towards actors from other countries, such as ourselves. So we at Celsio have been involved in several of the working groups, and in the first physical CCS forum that was hosted in Oslo, it also included a visit to our plant. So the Commission has been very open for external opinions, I think, and it has been really good. And as Lina said, it's the time for Norway, because now the EU has presented a more holistic view on CCS. Norway has so far not. They're still very proud of Longship and some research funding here and there, but there's no comprehensive strategy. And that's what we really need now. Marit talked about storage target. We also need maybe a capture target for fossil and biogenic, hopefully separate, so that they could start making the right incentives for actually making this happen within 2030, because we're so far behind the climate targets. But there are so many projects that are there in early feed or early project status that are ready to make the investment decision as long when they get the right framework conditions. So this is extremely important, and I see only from the waste to energy sector. So we are part of the CAN network, collection of the 8 largest waste to energy plants in Norway with CCS plants, and together we can capture 1.3 million tons of CO2 every year, half of it being biogenic. So there's a large potential from waste to energy and other sectors, but we're lacking this comprehensive view and strategy from the state.
I'll try to use our last 7 minutes to look a little bit in the chat and see if there's any questions from the listeners here. Please also know that you can send in questions to us afterwards, and we will try to forward to our experts. There's one around CCUS and CDR projects are, of course, different, and approaches continues to face scrutiny and criticism that they can potentially extend the viability of business as usual fossil fuel energy production. I think the strategy was very clear in its first introductory chapters on the need for these solutions, but also the clarity on, okay, where can we use what and how that should be science-based. But I think also, as Hanna started with, communicated through this strategy, is that for EU, it's no longer an if for carbon management solutions. It is a when and a how, and it's really that's what they're trying to force through. But I guess the question here can also relate to, you know, the general public and how we have to also still work with getting a deeper understanding for carbon management solutions overall, and also making sure that we can still differentiate between the different solutions. Anyone that wants to comment on the question on how to overcome the challenge here?
I can start and just be quick. And I think, of course, there might be some energy production left with CCS, but in general, it would be too expensive. Renewables will outcompete fossil fuels with CCS anyway. So it might be some reserve or base load that you have left, but it would not be the big driver in the energy mix, I'm quite sure. And for waste to energy, just important note is that it's not energy production primarily, it's waste handling. So we will need to treat the waste, but we have energy as a byproduct. So that's why we still need CCS going forward.
And on that, I think there's a huge now. I just saw the recent reports on methane from waste just stored deponier. Landfills, exactly. So, you know, then especially incineration and capture of that is becoming the only viable solution in our quest to try to limit extended warming. There's one question around biochar, and it's not represented. It's assumed that all products resulting in pyrolysis of biomass during production of biofuels is under gaseous form and subsequently capture. Is this an understanding of the value of biochar carbon removals itself, treating it as a waste product from biofuel production? Any technical assessments that wants to respond to that? No, maybe we'll have to get back to you on your question, Anna-Lena. I see that there's some few more that we would like to address. First of all, maybe to Bellona. Is there any, I guess there's a lot of interest in this field because here we have a Norwegian webinar and someone's asking for a timeline on Germany's industrial carbon strategy, but of course it's an important part of the market establishment. So do you have any news there?
Yeah, thank you. I don't, but I did see that question. So I asked one of my German colleagues, Fabian, who told me that there is no exact date yet, but that's, and this is thank you to Fabian who gave me these answers, that they don't think that there will be a release in the next weeks due to the strategy recently being referred back to the German Energy Agency for further revision after an internal ministerial coordination. And for those of you who want to, of course, learn more about this perspective, Bellona has a Berlin office, so doing some blatant commercial PR there.
And of course, I encourage everyone to follow Bellona's newsletters and websites and LinkedIn, and also to the rest of the panel's sites. There is a lot of information that we have to keep spreading and dialogues that we have to keep having in this very still novel field. And I think we'll have to continue to learn and address more of these questions in future webinars, because we have got quite a lot of insight and questions on this. I guess to sum up a little bit, we can say that the ICMS clearly reflects on the urgent need to foster a market for low carbon products and really ensure that we have a concrete demand and supply side policies in place. And of course, we maybe have to have a second webinar on what policy solutions and what market mechanisms make sense. I know that you, Anna, has some relevant thoughts there, but we have to close within a minute, so we'll have to address that later. And I'm sure we can make more webinars on this, because we know that this strategy is coming. We're hoping that Norway will join in order to have a lead market here. And let's hope these solutions all enable more carbon capture, more removal, more utilization where it makes sense, and then more storage. Huge thanks to the experts in this panel from Bellona, Zero, and Celsio for sharing your insights to us on the EU Industrial Carbon Management Strategy and its impact or potential impact also for Norway. This was a webinar from CCUS Norway and Bellona Europa. Thanks all for attending.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.